All right, so let's talk a little more about animation. So here I have this scene, and we've kind of talked about this where it's like, okay, I have this camera, and let's animate the camera going through these objects. So I'm going to set this up to a two view. You can see the camera. These represent the objects in space, and let's take the camera, and I'm going to move it forward. Now, once again, you're actually seeing that point of interest problem that I just had. See where it's flipping? So this is where I might want to take the camera and let's move that point of interest. And I'm going to move it past the... So now that the point of interest is here and not there, when I move forward, I go through all of the items. Okay. Let's turn on the other one. Here I might use, by the way, I want you to notice as this moves forward, if I have a layer like this panda image that is not 3D, notice that it does not get affected by the camera. So like even though the rest of them are moving within 3D space, this panda one is not. Okay. And it actually won't even, it should not even, I guess it does. You can see how like this one kind of like doesn't really fit within the space here because it just kind of shows it there because it doesn't conform to the 3D rules. Okay. I'm going to turn off this camera and here let's keep the point of interest. I like the point of interest kind of being maybe about there. And remember that if the point of interest, you can use the point of interest to kind of rotate your your camera the way you want. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to set a keyframe for it for this -600 and the X. And then let's literally just kind of move it this way. Oops. Turn off the panda. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. You can see here I'm moving the X value here. And the result is I get kind of this like interesting kind of pan shot there. Once again, though, this would not get affected by the panda because it's not a three-dimensional object. So it kind of stays on there like a sticker, as I like to say. Okay. All right. So we've talked about cameras. Let's talk a little bit about lighting. So lighting, light cameras are important in a production. Okay. Light is what allows us to see things. If without light or some sort of light source, like the sun or, a literal electric light or something like that, we cannot view anything. Okay. So here you can see how lighting can kind of create some interesting effects. So it's like here, this is the source of the light, and it's creating kind of this creepy, kind of downward kind of view, or here, so this is the light source, and it's like hitting these objects and causing trees, these interesting shadows, or here there's this light source, and it's kind of creating this interesting kind of smoky kind of effect. So, in the same way, there are people whose job it is in the film industry to do lighting and to add light and to make interesting uses of light. And in the same way, we can add lighting in After Effects. So we're going to talk about a couple different types of light. All right. The four major types of light are parallel light, parallel, if I can spell correctly, which I probably cannot. Parallel light, there's point light, there's spotlight. I feel like I'm forgetting. What's the one I'm forgetting? Maybe, or maybe there's only three. I might be thinking of ambient light. That's the one I'm thinking. I'm forgetting. All right. Let's see how lighting can affect our composition. So I'm gonna go to exercise 11. And I got this cute little dog against the background here. So by default, if you don't have any lighting, there's no lighting in our scene. Um, it's just whatever the default colors that you got from Photoshop or Photopea or whatever, service you're using. I'm going to go to Layer, New, and I'm going to go under where it says Light. So we're going to create a new light. And for now, let's start with parallel light. Okay. Um, and I'm going to hit OK. And it creates this light. You can tell it's a light because it has a little light icon to the left of it. Light layers only affect layers that are three-dimensional. Okay. So, and right now I do have a light in my scene, but it's not working because my other layers here are not three-dimensional. So what I'm going to do is turn both of these on. Now, it didn't do much. You might have noticed it dimmed it a little bit there. Okay, and let's talk about the different types of light. Okay, parallel light is meant to mimic sunlight. And what do I mean by that? The way that sunlight works is when you and your friends stand outside, let's say you're, in a field, like maybe you're in a stadium, like a football stadium. And let's say you and your friends stand on opposite sides of the stadium, right? Even though you guys are not close to each other, the sun that's coming down and diffuses through the atmosphere, it gives everyone exactly the same amount of light. So it doesn't matter whether, you and your friend are both getting the same amount of light, even though you're not near each other. Okay. So parallel light in After Effects affects all layers equally. It doesn't affect some areas or one area or one layer differently. Okay. I'm going to double click to get the settings back here. Now you could name the light. I'll just call this parallel light's fine, or I could say like main light or whatever it is you want to call it. The next is intensity. So if I lower the intensity to maybe like 50%, you can see that my scene gets dimmer, right? Because there is now less light in total in the scene. If I turn this on and off, you can see the difference. I could also go the other way and add more than 100%. That would sort of overexpose, as we would say, or it's going to like add a lot of light. So it kind of starts getting like almost like neon because there's so much light. This would be like if I set up a spotlight like right next to your face. You know what I mean? Is that so much light is being added to you. You know what I mean? That it's going crazy. So that's a parallel light. Like I said, you can double click to get those options. You can also go under here, under light options. So this is like where you might find that intensity. I'm going to open up that's light basics. Do I want them to do anything else? The other thing you might want to do, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Let's set the setting. Um, You can also color your light. Okay. By default, light is gives off white light. Okay. So the sun gives off white light. This is also why when you buy a light bulb, it's also painted white or has white, incandescence because it's meant to mimic sunlight. If you add a color to your light, it will give it a little bit of a, kind of a little bit of a warm or cool feeling to it. So, you know, um, if you have cool lighting is lighting with like a little bit of blue, like cool colors like green, blue, or purple added to it. And it kind of can make your scene feel a little more melancholy, a little more subdued, a little more tranquil. Warm lighting is lighting that has like a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red, a little bit of orange being added to it. Those are warm colors. And when you add that, it kind of makes your scene feel a little bit more happy, a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more day glow, so to speak. So if I take this color and I make it like a little bit blue, I'm going to make it a lot blue just for the sake of this. You can kind of see how like that changes my overarching color here. If you want to set it back, normally, the default color would be white. I could also make it like a little bit red, and that kind of gives it kind of a little bit of a warm glow to my scene. Oops. All right, let's go to a point light. I'm going to add a light. And let's set this back to white. I just want regular coloring. And let's use a point light. A point light is basically like a uh, light bulb or fire. Fire from match. So I want you to think about like, you know, um, if you or actually, it's a better one. Candle. I want you to think about like a candle with a flame, right? This is your light source. And oops, I did not mean to do that. I meant to grab this. And what's happening here is this is your light source, and the light is going out in all directions. Okay. We call this omnidirectional. This will be different later than when we have a spotlight where it's not omnidirectional. The light only goes in one direction. But for a point light, light goes in all directions. And so the way I like to think of it is like a candle. If you light a candle, the light goes out in all directions. But what happens is as the light goes out, this is the light source, the heat source. As it goes out, it gets like kind of weaker and weaker until eventually it's like it's the light is so weak it doesn't even illuminate anything anymore. Okay. So unlike the parallel, it very much matters where you place your point light. Where you place it will be, have the light. Where you don't place it will be a lack of light. So if I hit OK, I can actually set the position of the light. So if I set it up in the left-hand corner, you can see how this area is more lit and this is darker, right? Or if I were to take it and point it down here, you can see how this area is more lit and the other area is darker. Okay. So it very much matters where exactly you are placing your light. Okay. Next we did parallel light, right? Yeah, we talked about parallel light, how everything in my scene, doesn't matter which objects, should all get exactly the same amount of light. So we do a light, and we were to do parallel. You can see how everything is being affected. By the way, if you were to turn a layer off and make it not three-dimensional anymore, you can see how the light no longer affects it. So light only does affect three-dimensional layers. It does not affect non-three-dimensional layers. Let's talk about a spotlight. A spotlight is a light source that focuses on a particular spot, hence the term spotlight. So I have this scene, and what I'm going to do is create a new light, and let's make it a spotlight. And so what's actually happening here is you can see that the light is coming towards my scene, and it's creating, it has a cone, okay? What's literally happening is there's like a cone shape here, and the light's coming this way, and it's kind of going out to the edges. We can actually see this in three-dimensional space. I'm going to set this to a 2 view, and you can see this represents the my background picture, and this represents the light, the thing that looks like a cone. And you can see it's like hitting my scene here. The thing that affects the size of this is, so one is, because it's directional, you can actually change it. So if I rotate it, you can see how that affects what is being lit. So it's not an omnidirectional like the point light was. It very much matters what direction my light is going in. I can change things like the angle. The smaller the cone angle, the tighter the light is. Okay, so you can see how at a smaller degree, it's focusing on a smaller amount. At a higher degree, it's wider and more areas are getting lit. You might also notice that I have this kind of feathering around the edge of my lighting that is set by cone feather. So if I set that to 0, I get like this nice, very crisp edges. If I want it more subdued, I could really increase that with my cone feathering. All right. All right. So right now in my scene, I have white text on a blue background. Now it looks two-dimensional, but actually, if you were to look at it in 3 dimensions, here is my text, and then behind it is the background. Okay. And what I'm going to do is add a light. Let's add a spotlight. And so you can see that the spotlight is affecting, it's affecting the edges here, and it's affecting the background, the medium blue layer that's right here. Oops, I didn't mean to do that, but let me turn that back off. Now, normally what happens, let me try to draw this out so it's a little easier to understand. In real life, if you have a light source, this is my light source, and it's going out like that. If I have an object that's hitting the light source, and then there's something behind that, like in space, like this is like, let's pretend this is a card and this is like a background, like a sheet or something. This light source would cause this to shine a shadow on that. Does that make sense? Um, that's just how it normally works because there is a distance here. This would hit, push back the edges and make them, have a shadow, and the shadow would be against here. Okay. You'll notice though that that's not what actually happens here, at least by default. So I have this light hitting the text, but it's not casting a shadow on the background like it normally would. You can have it do that though. What you have to do is I'm going to go under the background, under material options, and we have to go to where it says cast shadows, and that has to be on. And then I'm going to go to the actual text itself under material options. Or sorry, cast shadow has to be on in terms of the thing that's being casting the shadow, which is the text. The background needs to have accept shadows on. And then, oops. Sorry about that. Okay. Here's how you do it. Okay, all three. So, okay, the things that you need to make this work is the light source itself must have cast shadows on. So, in this case, the light source is the spotlight. Under light options, I'm going to go to where it says cast shadows and turn that on. Not only does that need to be on, the object that's casting the shadow, which in this case is the text, would also have to have cast shadows on, which it does. If this was off, you would see that it would not cast shadows onto the background. And then the object that's accepting the shadows, which in this case is the blue background, that would have to have under material options, accept shadows on. If it didn't, you would see that it does not accept shadows. Okay. So I'm going to try this just to let's try to do our own here. I'm going to just turn this back into a one column layout. All right. I'm going to hit make the letter A or something. All right. Here's the letter A. And it, so my light has cast shadows on. This has to be three-dimensional, so it's being affected by the light. But then I also would have to go into the material options here, cast shadows on. And then you can see that what's happening is the light source is casting the shadow downward like that. Now, how much you're casting also depends on how close or far your object is from the thing it's casting on. So I'm going to set this back to a two column or a two view layout. So here is the text. Here's the thing that's casting on. If I were to take this A and let's just move it backwards in 3D space, you can see that the distance of the shadow from the object gets smaller as the two objects get closer. Okay, the farther these are from each other, you can see the shadow that's being cast is bigger. Okay. So, these are some interesting things you can do with shadows. Why would you want to do this? Well, this makes this look a little bit more organic. In real life, if were to have a light source on something and it was a physical thing, like a piece of paper, or like, it would cast a shadow. If you don't want that, simply turn off cast shadows on your lights, and you can, do that. You can also have light sources that don't cast shadows, but still act as light sources. So for instance, I could add a light source that's parallel, but I don't have it cast shadows. And so you can see it's affecting my scene without necessarily adding additional what's the word? Adding additional shadows to my scene. Okay. Another thing I wanted to point out, which we probably finally, there's ambient. Ambient is similar to a point light. The difference between is it only has intensity. So it's the thing about an ambient light is ambient lights, unlike the parallel, the point, or the spot, it does not cast shadows. It does not. So really, you use an ambient light just to kind of like lighten something up, or maybe use as coloring. So here it's like, you can play around with intensity, but you'll notice that there's no option here for casting shadows or anything like that. It doesn't have a cone. So, it's not a point light in the sense, it's kind of like a parallel light. The difference being that it does not have the ability to cast shadows or anything like that. And keep in mind, you may want to play around with multiple lighting in your scene. So maybe like I'm going to use this to kind of give a nice little light. And then maybe might want to have a spotlight that kind of, puts my focus in the center. You can see how this would be kind of, playing around with different lighting. If I turn this off, you can see that the lighting would be much more, much darker. This is giving me a little bit more light, but I don't have to worry about shadows or anything along those lines. Finally, by the way, you can always animate lights. I didn't make a specific exercise for this, but you can do that. So, for instance, let's go back to the one that I just did. So come no surprise to you that you can, use lighting. So for instance, maybe just for the sake of argument, I want the intensity of this light to change. So I'm going to start from 0, and then over 2 seconds, it goes to maybe 100. Or I could also animate the color of lights. So it starts as red, and then maybe it goes to blue over time. Okay. All right. Like I said earlier, we talked about mood lighting. Here I have this, we can use colored lights to really set a scene, to give it some more emotion, to give it more interest. So here I have this very kind of basic scene. I got a background, I got a plant, and I'm going to add in a light. And maybe let's even use a spotlight here. And I'll play around with the spotlight. Maybe I want the spotlight like a little bit bigger, not so much. So right off the back, it gives this kind of a little bit more depth, but right now it's using white light, and maybe I want to add like a little bit of red. So adding a little bit of red to this, that's maybe a little too much red, but see, it kind of gives the scene a little bit more warmth to it. You know what I mean? If I were to make this blue, it's a subtle kind of thing here. I'm not trying to necessarily hit people over the head with it, but adding like a little bit of blue, see how this feels a little bit more subdued than the other one did when it was just pure white? This is where it was when it was just pure white, you know? So adding in just a little bit of mood coloring, warm coloring, cool coloring can really kind of set the tone, you know what I mean? To your scene. So it's something to consider when you're doing this. Okay? All right. When you guys try that out, that was a lot. I know I went through a lot of stuff there. That was bibbity bobbity boom. That was um 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, please. Okay.